Hey, John Harris here from the Meaning OS movement. And in today's episode, I really want to just talk about identity beyond work. Who are you when that role falls away? And we're going to go over how work has changed, how more significant it's become, and look at what's going to happen as we enter the no work era. So if someone took away your job title tomorrow, who would you be? We don't really think about that often unless perhaps it is a job or a company goes bankrupt. But it's very profound and has a massive impact on people, and some people it causes extreme reactions too when they lose a job. And that's because, it's built into our social fabric now. So people often when they meet, especially for the first time, or they're chatting in meetups and so forth, they'll ask you, what do you do? And it's worth, your worth is really measured through output. Think about it, the kind of productivity you produce, your status, which is really connected to your work, and progress. So it plays a massive part in society. And I think this is going to be one of the biggest problems that we face, other than universal high income, the actual implementation of that. So when you're non-linear, this is how this shift has happened. It's gone from non-linear careers. My parents, father especially, mother didn't work, and he had one job basically his whole life. They would go into a company and basically work at that job their whole life. And now it's all over the place. You can see it's gone to people hop around all over the place. And so that's fallen away. Burnout is a big one, especially people, creators online, and even those in companies now. Burnout is a big deal. It's happening a lot. AI's impact obviously is a huge social and cultural shift. So the portfolio really is moved to lives. It's gone from your professional, it's really started to integrate into your personal. And roles are changing faster than identities can keep up. So it is moving, and this year will be 2026 will be a real pivotal year, because you're going to have some of the last year, some things that have been created, for example, Starship. From going forward soon, these things are, this year probably, especially into next year, will be created by AI. So circuitry that's not that great yet will become great. This year, maths will be utterly crushed by specifically Grok. So we're going through a massive change. And, to keep up with this is difficult because things are moving so fast. And in fact, when I first started talking about these things, people weren't really into AI a few years back and its impact. Now everybody's kind of worrying about whether their jobs are going to be replaced or not, or thinking about it at least. And so it has changed. But then again, now it's getting to a situation where we're not really understanding it, and what it actually is and how it's going to impact us, because the questions that AI can already produce in math is very difficult to understand what the question is, let alone what the answer is. So it's starting to come up with ideas and things that we're not even understanding how this whole thing, or what it is that it's actually asking. So it's becoming faster and faster, and this year we're now accelerating into that near the curve, and it's going to only explode from here. This year, next year, real pivotal moments. Not easy to comprehend the change that's coming. So we're moving from, as you probably know, from information, from AI, narrow AI, to general AI, and specifically moving atoms, where AI will start doing things, not just providing implementation solutions and so forth, and so various types of solutions. It's actually going to start doing through robotics. Very big year. So you'll see a lot of companies are now launching. Optimus is being launched and so forth. This isn't anti-work. So you're going to have the option in the future, the near future, of deciding whether you would like to work basically as an option, or certain things that you'd like to do more like a hobby, because they're going to have to roll out universal basic income for a simple situation. You've seen a lot of this probably online, where because of AI and robotics, products and services are going to start to drop down to near zero in price. And if they can get it right with the universal income, then you're going to have you'll be in the position to decide whether you want to do something or not. So this is a really big deal, and I'll discuss why just now. But it's not, it's about not letting work be the only place we identify our lives. So it's become a really big status, really big issues: work, career, job, perhaps business development and so forth, where you stand. And we obviously see people who are very successful and are very high, they have very high status. So this shouldn't be the only thing that defines you. And this is going to be a transition. I think we're going to have to elevate our personal identities to a much higher level. I think we're going to be forced, basically, to become more spiritual. Because if everything's been done for us, it leaves us to face ourselves and face our own demons and come to terms with them and start to elevate us as a species on a more spiritual plane. But I don't want to go down that rabbit hole today. Look, by the end of the discussion today, I'm hoping that your listeners will have a clearer sense of who they are beyond work, especially that work role. So you want to think about how work became our identity. Let's think about how this all transitioned. And work used to be what we did, and now it's who we are. And if you think about that in the Industrial Revolution, where people sat in factories, although they still do in many places, but you can see that's been replaced by robotics at very high speed. So they would do a job. And now it's transitioned to who you are, because a lot of it now, as I've mentioned, stems around status and stems around how we apply our creativity for a return on our time. And that is a very big key issue. So stability and safety are tied to jobs. And you'll notice specifically more so in the past than now, within the last few years, because, as I mentioned, people would really see their job as in a large organization, become a lawyer, become a doctor, and so forth, were very big status issues, and parents were very keen on their children to do that. In fact, in many developing countries, it's still the case. But the first to start falling will be accountants and lawyers. These guys, they're right in the firing line. So stability tied to jobs, and safety, obviously, with having an income creates that safety. But praise and validation through performance was one of the things we'd get. So not in remuneration, but the praise you'd get through performance within the work role. Social belonging built around professionals. So this is a very key component of our lives. And this transition is going to be very difficult for a lot of people. And I'll tell you why. It's because of the speed. Even if it happened over a long period of time, it would be difficult. But it's not. People have got to come to understand that we are about entering this year, right now, a very big shift and a very big increase in acceleration on AI. So, there is a hidden cost to all of this. When work goes well, identity feels solid. So if things are going well at work, it normally has a very knock-on effect within the family, within social circles, and so on and so forth. And when work falters, identity collapses. And you've seen people go to extreme measures after they've lost their job. So your identity is directly tied to your work now. So over-identifying with work makes life very fragile. And I've seen people in one of the most, should we say, stable environments within the banking sector, all starting to work from home. And in fact, we'll see how that transitions to finding other jobs. And this is a step that's, if you worked at a bank or you worked in one of those big industries, you were pretty secure, but that's not the case now. It's changing, and you probably know people and bank people that now may be working remotely. And in fact, how those jobs are going to be defined and whether they fall away and how many fall away in the near future is going to be very interesting. When work is quiet, who shows up? So think about it. if things, even within a business, if things quieten down and there's very little work, what starts to happen? Think about what starts to happen. And that'll be something that gets amplified as we have no jobs. So if we don't have work and a job, you can imagine what's going to start to show up. And I've got a feeling that some of the controls we put in place for these lockdowns and so forth, we're working around that. But I think there's been a shift. I think that the powers that be, some of the biggest industries in the world, and some of the most prominent people in the world have come to the realization that through control, through a scarcity mindset, I think they've clicked and the light has come on that it can be done. This can be, we can move forward under an abundance mindset. So this is a big shift for the guys that were in the powers that be. I think they realize that you don't have to lock everything down and work on scarcity, because technology is going to provide abundance, and it is going to happen. So I think they've changed their positions a little. Well, let's say some of them have. So jobs, if you go to this next sort of idea that I have here, is the fragility of role-based identity. So jobs change. And as I mentioned, the rate of people changing jobs is really increased. Also within the jobs, within businesses, people are having to change. They're having to upskill, and whether they, as I mentioned, I don't think this is sustainable, but industries are evolving and at ever increasing speeds, and energy shifts over time. So as it becomes necessary, as things are forced on people, then they start to take action. People don't like to take action if they don't have to, and this is obviously is conservation of energy in itself, because by doing things that you're familiar with, it takes less energy to think about them and do them. When you do new things, it's great, and we fear that we won't be good at it and that we will fail. But there's also a very big energy component here, and that is it takes a huge amount of energy to learn something new. And that's why the importance of our brains, our computers, are so good at filtering. Otherwise, we would have an explosion up there. Burnout feels like personal failure. And, people, a lot of courses and things out there teaching people how to prevent burnout, how to manage burnout. And when people do burnout, they do feel like they've let people down, let themselves down, they've failed. But it doesn't matter who you are. We're still physical entities. We're still human. And burnout's very real. So it's something that we're going to have to look at. And you can imagine if people were starting out in the early days of banking, for example, working in big buildings with a whole lot of calculators and working out the interest every day, physically doing it on a calculator. We got 8 billion people, and most of those are on banking now and online banking. So you can imagine that you've had to have this transition, and there's no way you would have been able to manage this otherwise. Look, rest feels like laziness. So these are very big things, because people feel guilty if they rest. Not everybody, don't keep me wrong, but many producers, people who are active, feel like if they rest, it's laziness. But there's a time, and you have to become very disciplined at this, when you need to rest. And these things is some of the things these are some of the things we're going to talk about. The transitions feel like loss of self. And that's why you got to be very focused and learn and preempt some of these things. Learn about them and preempt them, because otherwise they're going to hit you like a wall and you're not going to be ready for them. We will discuss more and more about the role. If I'm not useful, am I still valuable? So you think about it. If you're not useful, are you still valuable in society? And we come from hunter-gatherers. And people those were roles, useful roles. And although things have changed unbelievably, we still have DNA that hasn't changed as much, or anywhere near as much. We still have basically a 2-3 million year old brain. So it hasn't changed that much. Physically, DNA-wise, but it has changed hugely within society itself. So your role is something you express, not something you are. If you can separate your role as something that You express, but that's not necessarily who you are. It's maybe a small portion of you, but you've got to balance it out. And how can I talk about that? Because I'm basically retired. So I'm already in the situation that you guys are entering, those that are in work at the moment. When you get to that stage, you then have a lot of time and you're not sure what to do with it. So you need to now set another set of parameters. And that's what the meaning operating system movement is to define a new operating system to input within your mind, a new way of doing, a new way of structuring your day, your time. A meaningful life needs an identity that survives change. And it's okay, as I mentioned, if change is at a slow rate, even that's uncomfortable. But at the rate we are about to experience right now, this year, it's going to be crazy. So that is something we have to think about. And how we think about it is we need to visualize what it is and what is the new role we're going to take. Let's have a think about reclaiming identity from the inside out instead of the outside in. So from role to essence. Who in essence are you? From output to orientation. So you're going to look at what your outputs are. Values, what you stand for regardless of context. So you've got to think about what is the one thing you wouldn't want AI to take from you as a human being. And values may well be obviously one of them. So you need to see what you're going to stand for, and regardless of what context it's in, outside of the work, etc. Integrity is another thing. Curiosity is another thing. Care, courage, creativity. These are all values of things that you need to be focused on and think about, things that AI, you may not want them to take from you. Well, I definitely wouldn't want them to take from me. Ways of being, how you show up. Being a listener. We all have worldviews, and as soon as somebody goes counter to our worldview, we immediately try to dominate with our ideas. But now we need to perhaps listen a bit more, because connectivity is going to be very important. To be a builder, you can still build things. It may not be directly for monetary gain, because if you're under universal wage, you may want to do it as a hobby, but you can still build things. You can still learn things. You can connect to people as a necessity, basically, to be staying human. And you can become a guide. Sources of meaning, you need to think about what nourishes you. Learning, that gives meaning. Service to others. All great leaders, the greatest leaders, have been in service to humanity. Beauty. Ellen talks about some of the basic 3 tenets that he's trying to give as a basic concept to Grok, and beauty is one of them. Having curiosity is another one, and be as truth seeking as possible. Those are some of the things that he's trying to instill in his AI platform. But we still, within us, obviously, will have our own view of beauty. Relationships is key to being human, and growth, personal growth. Still very important. If you don't have the pressure, normally our biggest growth takes place under huge pressure. And just remember, we're not going to have work pressure. So we're going to have, as I mentioned, get to a higher status and have self-discipline to modularize an area where we look at growing ourselves. In fact, put that kind of pressure on ourselves to grow. If no one paid you, what would you still feel, and would you still feel meaningful? So think about that. If you don't get paid, do you still feel meaningful? And it's a big change. I want to just tell you, it's a very big change. If you think about these things carefully, it is a big change. Work becomes healthier when it expresses identity instead of supplying it. Think about that. Work becomes healthier when it expresses identity instead of supplying it. So it can be an expression of part of who you are. It shouldn't be supplying it. You shouldn't be dependent on it. And that's something that these are transitions that seem pretty obvious when you say them, but people aren't sitting down thinking about these things until it's forced upon them. That is the problem. So the next thing I'd like to chat about, the next idea, is redefining success without losing ambition. So this is going to be very, very difficult. So to define your success without the ambition of work. Identify beyond work. And that's often associated with a lack of ambition. Should I say identity beyond work? It's going to be a tough transition. But you can align and need alignment over acceleration, sustainability over success. So let me say that again. You need alignment over acceleration and sustainability over status. And you're going to have to sit and think in your own lives how you can enact and implement this in your life. Does my work support who I'm becoming? Does it leave me with energy for life? Think about it. Sometimes to try and have motivation to be excited about something is very dependent on work. And you're going to have to try and figure out how you're going to apply that to a life where work is non-existent. So the current thing is, if you're working, a lot of that supports part of what you're becoming. And in fact, for most people, that is everything. But, a lot of times you get exhausted and you don't really have enough energy and discipline, mental discipline. People hate to actually think. You've got to have that discipline to think and the energy for life itself. And it's not easy. I can assure you, when I first coming into retirement, it's very difficult to transition from being at the office, solving problems every day. It becomes a very big part of your life and within the work environment. To suddenly have that just within your personal environment is tricky. But I've seen this confluence of professional and personal life coming together because technology has always been doing that. It's always been devolving towards the individual. It's a leveling of the playing fields. It's the biggest lever that's ever existed. So with that lever, you obviously now have to look at the individual and how the confluence with the professional life is merging into your personal life. In fact, it's going to fall away altogether. So that is something that I didn't have in my mind wrapped around. I thought, how is it going to merge? And are we just going to do things that are creative? We're making money, which a lot of people are doing now, which is more of what they are, their purpose in life and what they like to do. But that's going to become optional. So these are things we need to think about. Let goals serve identity, not replace it. So it all needs to be in service of who you are. Those goals, there are goals you can set within your different areas of life that are outside of work, family, your spiritual goals, etc., etc. So those things you can set outside of work. But a lot of business and career and even wealth is tied up in that. How wealth will work in the future, I'm not sure, because it's becoming very difficult on a universal wage. If it's universal high income, it will be different, which Alan wants. A universal basic income will not be good. Because as the cost comes down, people in big business are thinking the profit margin is going to go up. They're not. They're going to have to drop their prices. And they drop their prices so that it's in line with universal basic income, which really means the government will give you money and you just give it back again. But if we have high income, we will be able to look at some wealth. And this is, again, as an abundance point of view, as opposed to a scarcity point of view. Okay, so our core idea is success without self is hollow. Self without direction stagnates, meaning lives in the balance. So you're going to have a balance. You're always trying to pull back to the middle. So just understand that, it seems without self, it seems hollow. So you're going to have to look hard at yourself. I'm afraid that's what I'm getting to. Everything is going to now be revolving around being as opposed to doing. And what you do is going to be part of your being much more so than it has in the past. So who are you becoming? There's the last idea, just as we come towards the end of our talk today. Work is important, but it's not the whole story. Identity built solely on roles cannot survive change. If that's your only role, you'll see a lot of experts are stuck. We're already seeing it, and specifically they hold on to a point of view They're not necessarily the authority in something, but they're an expert in something, and then it becomes a problem. Your identity is built solely on roles, and that's difficult for it to make change for that reason. So you are not your job as a small part of you. You are the one using the job to express something deeper. So it's part of your expression, or it should be, but it does represent something deeper. You are capable of building and doing things and making things, even if it's optional. You can still do all of that. If work disappeared for a season, what would remain true about you? Think about these kind of reflections, and you need to be prepared for what's about to come. And this is the first step in doing it. Create a personal vision. Often companies will have a vision. It may be fairly generic, but they'll have a vision. We've moved from basically a vision to an MTP now, a massive transformative purpose, when you talk about exponential businesses. But within yourself, you also need an MTP, a personal motivator, massive transformative purpose within yourself. What is your individual vision? Build an identity that moves with you, one rooted in values, presence, and meaning. Values, presence, and meaning. We're going to have to raise the bar. Our status of personal power is going to have to rise. Work is what you do, meaning is who you are becoming. Let me say that again. Work is what you do, meaning is who you are becoming. And that's very important to work on that. To do this, you need to set basically a time frame, a scheduled, and you need to just, other than build a routine, which I learned, as I started retiring, not only a routine, what's key now is to understand that you need a rhythm. Out of the routine, when are the best times in the day to do what? Rhythm-wise. Look, something to reflect on. Perhaps you want to write one sentence that begins with, beyond my work, I am someone who. So think about that. Write a sentence out right now. Write one sentence that begins with, beyond my work, I am someone who, and you're going to describe who will do what beyond work. Something to start thinking about, and I'm sure that will be helpful. As I said, it's John Harris here from the Meaning OS movement, and I'll get you in the next episode. Have a great one.